like a big old party to celebrate my promotion after I'm done with this shit.
Seriously, how long does it take to make a phone call?
I mean, that would be funny, but no, we're not doing that with the cake again, okay?
Wait, I thought we weren't doing any more of these. Why aren't there more Western games? Sorry, that's a jarring way to open a review. But seriously, Hollywood had over 2 decades where Westerns reigned supreme. In contrast, the number of games set in the Old West barely fill a Wikipedia page. And that's to say nothing of their quality. Sure, you have the acclaimed Red Dead series, but what else? Gunfighter, The Legend of Jesse James? Wild Wild West, The Steel Assassin? What, you haven't heard of those games? Of course you haven't, they suck. So where do the Call of Juarez games land on the quality scale? Well, I can imagine a more cynical reviewer saying that, with the exception of Gunslinger, they're mostly junk. But I'd argue they're all worth playing. The first game is rough around the edges, but has an off-kilter charm in the form of soldier-turned-preacher Ray McCall, the game's dogmatic anti-hero who wields a revolver in one hand and a Bible in the other. Bound in Blood isn't spectacular, but it's a considerable step up from the first game. Better story, more engaging characters, and vastly improved gameplay, excluding the horribly designed dueling sequences, of course. And the Cartel is worth playing for the sole fact that it's complete garbage, and after finishing it, you'll grow to appreciate even the worst parts of the previous games.
You can't be serious.
But Gunslinger is today's subject, and by far the best game in the series. Action-packed, tightly paced, and filled with so much wit, style, and personality that it's hard to believe it was published by Ubisoft. Maybe if you put out more games like this and cut back on the bloated collectathons, you wouldn't be staring down the barrel of a potential 10-cent buyout. But I digress. So Gunslinger puts you in the role of grizzled bounty hunter Silas Greaves, voiced by the late great John Saigon. The game opens with Silas wandering into a bar in Abilene, Kansas. There he regales the patrons with wild tales of his pursuit of Roscoe Rustling Bob Bryant, during which he allegedly rubbed elbows with infamous outlaws like Jesse James and Billy the Kid. Emphasis on allegedly.
Wait, so you were friends with Billy the Kid?
Yeah, sort of.
There's plenty to praise about Gunslinger, from its stylish visuals to its punchy gameplay, but what elevates it above just being an afternoon's worth of Western FPS fun is the narration. When I think back on the stories I've enjoyed that feature an unreliable narrator, Gunslinger is one of the first to come to mind, and it may even be one of my favorite examples of this trope.
Wait, I'm jumping the gun here. Let me back up and give you some background on this sumbitch.
For starters, it's surprisingly funny, mainly thanks to Saigon, who imbues Silas with a self-assured, laid-back demeanor that makes you want to pour him another drink to keep him talking, but also slap that same drink out of his hand because he's starting to sound like your grandpa, frequently going on tangents and taking forever to get to the point of his drawn-out story.
I'm painting a picture here. There was this beautiful waterfall and a crystal-clear stream that led to a verdant valley that was truly...
Consider your picture painted. What happened next?
But a key part of what makes the narration so amusing is that all of Silas's embellishments are depicted in-game, which is taken to absurd levels when he starts changing pivotal details on the fly as the patrons question his story. One of the most memorable scenes in the game has Silas recounting a bandit ambush in a canyon, only for him to mistakenly refer to the bandits as Apaches halfway through. When one of the patrons raises an eyebrow, he says,
Hold on, were you attacked by Apaches? What happened to the cowboys?
Did I say they were Apaches? I said Clanton's cowboys attacked me Apache style.
And the Apaches are whisked away and replaced by bandits. It's honestly one of the more imaginative ways I've seen of working a non-interactive element into the gameplay. And this isn't the only section that's graced by his impromptu revisions. You'll occasionally hit a dead end or find yourself surrounded by enemies with no means of escape, only for Silas to suddenly recall seeing a ladder in a strange place. That strange place being the sky.
Instead, I spotted a ladder, way into the mine from the opposite side.
On the surface, Gunslinger is a fairly straightforward anti-revenge story, but the underlying theme of how easily misinformation spreads is the more interesting topic, the game's clever framing device serving as a comedic way to explore it. In this regard, the standout level for me is one centered around the notorious Dalton brothers and their failed attempt to rob 2 banks at the same time, which Silas, of course, claims to have witnessed. What's interesting is that you play through the level 3 times, each time with a different character describing what happened that day, with varying degrees of accuracy. Ben, the bartender, grossly oversimplifies the event, Dwight, the starry-eyed kid, believes that Silas killed all the Daltons by himself, and Silas... well, Silas does his usual thing.
But Emmett Dalton survived the robbery in Coffeyville. He's the only Dalton who did.
They say he was shot 23 times.
Well, Dwight, who do you think put all those damn holes in him?
The Old West was full of myths and tall tales, many of which have been debunked in recent years, and Gunslinger shows how some of these may have originated, blurted out in between drinks and seedy bars by gunslingers and barflies alike. It all culminates in a story that consistently made me laugh and also left me pondering how much of what we've read about the Old West is actually true. It's a lot more thoughtful and intelligent than you'd expect a low-budget, high-octane FPS would be.
But I have to admit, that boy had grit.
So what's the deal with the gameplay then? Well, it's safe to say that Gunslinger doesn't reinvent the wheel here. It has all the hallmarks of a shooter released during the final stages of the 360 PS3 era. There's regenerating health, quick time events, hit markers, and the levels mainly consist of linear paths punctuated by combat sequences. A less creative reviewer would call it Call of Duty Western Edition, whereas I'd call it Call of Duty Western Edition. Hey, I never claimed to be the next Roger Ebert. And besides, Call of Duty Western Edition isn't a bad label. As it turns out, COD's gameplay translates pretty well to the Old West setting.
Point being, I was under serious attack. And my reinforcements was nowhere to be seen.
You don't have a huge arsenal to work with, but what's here is excellent. You have the classic Winchester rifle, a mean-looking double-barrel shotgun, and a couple of revolvers, both of which you can dual-wield. See, I have no problem with a small arsenal as long as each weapon is distinct and fun to use, and these most certainly are, thanks in no small part to the game's beefy sound design.
Lonesome. Yeah. I'm finding this all a little hard to swallow, friend.
Well, maybe you need to wash it down with some whiskey. By the way, did I mention that train was flying down those tracks like a bat out of hell?
It's some of the most satisfying gunplay I've experienced in a Western shooter. Not that there's much competition, but at the very least, it elevates the series' gunplay from passable to great. This is part of the appeal of the Call of Juarez series for me. You can see how Techland ironed out the kinks with each game, ditching ideas that didn't work and reworking the ones that needed a little more polish. On that note, the dueling sections from Bound in Blood return and are, let's be kind and say, not dogshit this time. You square off with your opponent and use A and D to position your hand over your gun while keeping your crosshair centered on them, and then draw it as soon as they draw theirs. It works perfectly. I mean, you can't make an Old West game without duels, right? Even though most historians agree they almost never happened, but anyway, now it's not perfect by any means, and if there's one thing I'd rework, it would be the upgrade system. Not that it isn't functional, it's just very easy to break the game with. So Gunslinger has a bullet time mechanic, giving you a much needed edge during the more difficult gunfights. But dump your points into the right upgrades, and by the halfway point, the difficulty goes right out the window as you auto-lock onto enemies while staying in bullet time for several seconds.
I was determined not to let that move.
It's still mindless fun, but I wish this was balanced in a way that didn't trivialize the game's difficulty. But let's be real, this is all bordering on nitpick territory. So let me conclude by saying that Gunslinger still gets a strong recommendation from me. If I had to rank all the games I've reviewed for this channel in a tier list, I'd place it right at the top alongside Metal Hellsinger. It's slick, funny, action-packed, and doesn't overstay its welcome. A better question to ask is, why aren't there more games like Call of Juarez Gunslinger?
Shot him in the back at a saloon just like this one. Anybody up for another beer? Ben?
And we're all set. Happy Halloween, everyone! Or depending on when this video comes out, happy belated Halloween.
Yeah, Rolls Royce would be rad.
You know, I'm surprised management didn't give me a horror game instead. Like, I've been playing through The Quarry recently. It's fine, it's not bad, I would have happily reviewed that too. But you know how the old saying goes, you're paid to stink, not to think. Okay, that's not an old saying. Anyway, why is the camera still running? Okay, bye, go to sleep, good night!
Pop, pop, peanut butter, butter pops. Pop, pop, pop 'em in your mouth. Pop!